And we are live. It's been a minute. Welcome back, Erik Kleinsmith. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Erik. Appreciate it.
All right. Now, obviously, we're going to be talking this episode about Zodiac Killer, and you are saying that it is definitively not Ted Cruz.
It is not Ted Cruz. Quit it with the comments.
Well, it is funny because Ted Cruz does resemble the drawings, but it's like I don't even think he was born at the time.
I mean, I don't even know. I don't really understand where that even came up until we broke the story last week. It was, I was just like, what the hell does Ted Cruz have to do with it? And I heard from a couple of my connections, like, he tweeted about the story, saying, basically mocking anybody that said it was him.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Ted Cruz Zodiac Killer, I have to say, is one of the better memes I've seen for a long time. It went on in 2016 when he was running for president, and it was funny because he really does resemble it. And some smart ass, went out there and said, "Hey, it's Ted Cruz."
Yeah,
and here we go. He embraced it. He owned it. I mean,
the thing is if you are okay with self-deprecating humor, I mean, that's really, to me, the best kind there is. It's it has to be. My humor is a very dry humor, and it's I'm okay with taking shots at myself. What I don't like is seeing folks that are making fun of somebody at somebody else's expense, and that gets a little that can just get mean spirited.
Yeah, and I definitely think it's wise. I mean, especially and we'll get off Ted Cruz in a minute, but he was known as being, just a real hard ass, hardcore, very conservative, the guy who hold ups, Senate, and going with that a little bit further and being cheeky about it. Like, that's, no, that's not me. I'm really not, it kind of softened the edges a little bit by going with it.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh my,
right.
Pete A. Turner, the guy
Pete is on. Hey, Pete.
Okay, so I have to, get my ego pumped every once in a while. Last time you were on, we were talking about Robert Rackshaw, is it?
Yes.
Rackstraw.
Right.
And how you guys had determined that he is the infamous Dan Cooper or DB Cooper.
Yeah.
And right before you left, you were saying, oh, but I've got another case we're working here.
Right.
And I don't know if I was on the air when I said it or not, but I said, oh yeah, Zodiac, right? And you were all circumspect. You're like, well, we don't really talk about it. It's early stages. I'm like, oh yeah, Zodiac, right?
Right. And that's what's interesting is right around that time, I had to go back to my hometown in Plymouth, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit. And that story had already come out about DB Cooper. So I had a lot of friends were asking me, it's like, so what, are you doing Hoffa? Are you doing Hoffa? And it's just like, it's like, man, I know we're sitting here drinking beers and everything, but, I really can't tell you. Well, we put up there on the casebreakers.org website that, the last Hoffa dig is we've got a tip off on that one as well. Now, again, since, whether it's Hoffa or whether it's Zodiac or with DB Cooper, the naysayers and the folks who do this as a, passionate hobby just came right out of the woodwork. And so we've been, I know we've been getting attacked, left and right. And I understand it's like, oh, you didn't know this and therefore you don't know anything. Those kind of things. And I don't want to dismiss them all because we ourselves are extremely skeptical on every step of the way once we went to, nobody's jumping up and down on, banging trash can lids and says Gary F. Poste is the guy. Gary F. Poste is the guy. There's no other way it can be worked. If he's not the guy, it's OJ. It's that kind of thing. If we're still circumspect and we're still very skeptical of the information. So, our search is for hard evidence. It is such a hard thing to do with a 55-year-old case. It's as old as I am. As a matter of fact, the Sherry Joe Bates murder from 1966. And so that's, you're really no longer doing a cold case investigation. You're doing a historical investigation, trying to put pieces together because nobody around is even alive. Our Zodiac Killer died in 2018. Same thing with the Cooper case, although Cooper was alive. when the first documentary came out on the History Channel, and it was a two-parter, and it was, spelled everything out until like the last 15 minutes, and then they queered all the data and just kind of left it hanging. I don't know if they did it for liability or what, but it kind of left a real bad impression of, hey, if we're going to work on this, we're going to do it publicly. We're going to come out right forward and just say, we're not making money off of this. I haven't made a dime off of this. This is just something I'm doing for fun to support Tom Colbert and his team of folks. And, that's, for that matter, it's not in our pride to say, if it's not, if this is not Gary F. Poste, then we're never going to admit it, and we'll take it to the dying grave. That we'll be adamant about. I show me the evidence. That's the whole thing.
Okay. On that note, I am curious then. Do you feel less or more confident, or the same, that Gary Poste is a Zodiac killer as you do that Robert Rackstraw was DB Cooper?
We got to a point with Rackstraw where I was saying to friends and family, look, if this guy didn't do it, OJ did it. I mean, there were so many pieces of evidence that we were lining up. I mean, Tom Colbert handed the FBI somewhere up in the words in the lines of 1,800 pieces of evidence, to include the parachute, two pieces of the parachute that he had sent a team up into the wilderness where we probably had landed. Now, you can't just go into hundreds of thousands of miles of wilderness to find that one tiny needle in a haystack unless all of the information and evidence that had lined up to that was accurate. You just can't take a stab in the dark like that unless and so that, to me, as soon as that piece was found, and we've had folks in law enforcement just come right out and tell us behind the scenes, like, look, till you provide us some physical evidence, give me a piece of the parachute, and only then will we talk.
And you did.
And we gave a piece of parachute, and then they didn't, and nobody wanted to talk. So it's
they closed it. They just closed it. They just closed it.
Well, they closed.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And that's and the thing is what we think on that. And Tom's, he's got his book out, The Last Master Outlaw. He's going to put like 3 more chapters of that and republish it. But what we think on that one is he was working for another agency in either in his time in Vietnam or in the Central America in the mid 80s.
Wouldn't be the first time.
What's that?
Wouldn't be the first time. Probably knew Oliver North. So
if you're an asset, well, I don't know if he knows Oliver North. If you're an asset of a covert agency, your name is, that operation is classified for decades. It's not 50 years from when he jumped that, this is the 50th anniversary in November of the jump. It won't be classified then. It'll be classified 50 years after he's done being associated with the agency or that operation has been closed. So you could be waiting forever. But when one agency like the FBI is doing a search and they bump into another agency that says, can't touch him, he's ours, then guess what? That investigation line ends right there. So that's kind of where we ended up with the Cooper case. And we did a FOIA it was several years ago, and there's been a slow release of information that has come out that's been helpful, but there really isn't much more that we can do for the Rackstraw case. So that's why we started turning our attention to the Gary Francis Poste and the Zodiac Killer.
Interesting question here, and then we'll shift back to Gary. Then he may have been a red team to prove it could be done. Like, could that have been an operation?
I don't think so. I don't. You don't commit a major felony, to do a red team like that. This is the only unsolved case in FAA history, at least in the Cooper case. So you don't really get hired to do that. I mean, I know that that's the case, but that even red teaming efforts that I have done, we've never, and these were at the highest level, classified red teaming. We never broke the law to do it.
Okay. At least not here.
At least in my,
at least not domestically.
Yeah, I'll just say in my experience. Yeah. So.
Yeah. In other countries, maybe we broke their law. You never know. I don't know if you saw this. I thought it was kind of funny. Somebody in 2018 posted on Facebook, "My last visit with old man Gary Poste, Zodiac."
Right.
I didn't know if you had happened to see that, but that
we did. That's, and you see, this guy led a very interesting life. I mean, even after he was done killing, and we can't explain the psychology. We don't have that background of why he stopped, other than looking at the things that had changed in his life. And the most significant thing that had changed is that he'd gotten married, and immediately found himself with new with a new family, new lifestyle and that kind of thing. But within that, he still carried on some of the same manipulation and controlling aspects that somebody who would want to kill in a serial manner would possess.
So then he potentially could have been like BTK in that regard, unusual killer who stops or goes dormant for a really long time.
To a degree, there's a lot of, obviously there's a lot of studies on serial killers and how they, there is a psychological need to have that fix and get that high, and then you drift off, and then you need it again, and it as you spiral down, it gets more and more, right. You have to do it more than anything else. So it's a big surprise. Like, wait a minute, it just stopped. Well, there is precedence for that. That has happened in the past.
But it's unusual.
It is. Oh yeah, it is. I mean, killing is an act that provides a psychological fulfillment for serial killers. If that's why when somebody stops, you have to look at what has changed so that he has something else that fulfills that. And the case that we think is that he started to form this posse of disaffected youth that he could control, he could take out in the wilderness, he could train them. He could train them in hunting and shooting and gutting, and cleaning animals, hiding the carcasses up, in a cache. There's a method so that bears can't get it. You can go back to it later on. All of those things in terms of a survivalist tendencies may have taken over his desire to kill for whatever reason. Unfortunately, because he's passed away, you can't get into his psyche at the time. And even if he was still alive, he may not even possess the knowledge or mental fortitude to be able to go back and pry those parts of his life open again.
Yeah, that is really, really odd. So now, can we go through then how you guys went about it?
Yeah. And the case itself was initially brought to us by a contact of ours who we're just going to call Dale. And he's involved with some proprietary issues over the work that he did and the information that he used. So we can't use his right now. We've not pulled out his full name or who he was associated with. But Dale had been working on the case while he was in California, and it became kind of I hate to say this, it really became a driving force to his back life. It's a driving hobby, you might say, or
obsession.
I don't want to go far as obsession, because he was able to recognize, is like, look, this is just getting overwhelming. I have to stop. And you saw from the 2007 movie with Jake Gyllenhaal and Robert Downey Jr. It destroyed some lives of guys investigating this. And there's entire societies that even Cooper, the Cooper Con is held every year. This is the 50th anniversary, which, by the way, we got disinvited from this year. So it's that's been fun to figure out. Wow. But again, so this guy Dale had been working on it, and he had gotten in touch through, and I think it was through a conference called CrimeCon in Los Angeles. And CrimeCon takes place every year. It's a fascinating. I have never been there, but I was looking more and more into getting involved with it professionally, and I found and I read the stats of CrimeCon, and I'm going off on a tangent. I'm sorry, but CrimeCon gave they put out the demographics of who goes to these, and of their attendance, it's and I think it's upwards of 30,000 people that attend. It was 85% female.
Oh yeah. True.
And the average age, and the average age is 40, and the average household income was 170,000.
Oh, it's huge.
So it's. Yeah. It is, you see an entire segment of the population, and I know a lot of folks. It's like, oh, I just so love those the crime shows and the true crime stories and things like that. And my mom,
Lifetime.
What's that?
Have you seen Lifetime TV, the Women's Network?
No, is that all
killer? All movies of the week and serial killers, and I mean, women are into it. And also keep in mind, women are typically the decision makers for finances in the household.
Oh, right.
So they're very, very huge market.
Right. Gotcha. Well,
out there.
Yeah. I mean, my mom's 82. She loves watching the shows. I mean, they all have to have British accents for her, but she still likes, she still likes those, a good murder mystery. So Dale met with at the time when I was at American Military University, he met up with one of the part-time faculty there, a woman named Jen Buchholz, who was a former Army soldier, counterintelligence agent, who now is doing private investigations. And Jen Buchholz had worked on a crime in Arkansas for a murder that was a cold case, and essentially had solved it, and used some different techniques using crowdsourcing, and that's I can talk that a little bit, but but Dale had brought this to her, and he had written up kind of a manuscript. It was almost part fiction, part narrative, but it laid out the evidence that he was able to put together, and gave it to Jen just to say, look, I'm looking for some help. And so she came to some of the faculty within the university, and I was working within the business development branch of the university at the time, and they just said, hey, have you talked to Erik Kleinsmith? He's been on the DB Cooper case for 10 years. Did you want to hook up with them? And so, yeah, I said, yes. They gave me the tip off. I gave Jen a call. We talked about it. I said, let me look at the manuscript, and I read through it very quickly. And I said, all right, I'm going to send this over to Tom, see what he thinks. Again, it's just.
Now, did it start with the name? Was Poste already known at the time, or to Dale?
And Dale had received a tip from an immediate family member that said, hey, I think this is the guy. This guy is a family member, and I grew up, in his shadow. And it wasn't until I became an adult that I realized that he could be it. He was he gave us some different details about how just totally indiscriminate he was at killing, whether it was animals or whatever. That it was just I can't say whatever. It was animals, and so the. It's like
animals
or other people, somebody that would be wrong. But so he, after he became an adult, he finally realized that, I think this guy could be the Zodiac Killer. He started reading, getting into crime stories himself. And he's like, God, all signs point to this guy as a family member. And so he did it. He did a question and confronted him. A semi-confession that was very vague, but it kind of in a way that Poste would probably prefer it. And then the next day, he received a book about the Zodiac Killer in his mailbox or on his front doorstep from Gary Poste, and said, like, this is good reading. And I think it was the and I can't remember the author, the guy that had plugged Lee Allen as the killer, and was the part of the San Francisco Chronicle, and there was the actor Jake Gyllenhaal. I can't remember the guy's actual name at the moment, but that was kind of his tip off. And he went to local law enforcement, try to talk about that, and but in law enforcement's defense, there's somebody probably coming to them, whether it's Vallejo, whether it's Riverside, whether it's San Francisco, every month, and say, hey, I know who it is. And so it's like, right, get in line with everybody else. It's like, well, no, I think this guy's a family member. I gotcha. Get in line with everybody else, and we'll get to it when we get to it. And so that's with his frustration, he was able to meet up with Dale and talk to him. So it was passed from a family member to Dale, to Jennifer, to myself, and then I passed it over to Tom. And Tom looked at it. It was, again, we had our skeptical blinders on the whole time. Is like, unless we see some spark here, this is not worth pursuing. And the spark is the key point that got us to notice it.
Okay, so is that the process? I'm curious. So like, is your methodology a variant of the scientific method? Like, you just try to disprove every single thing that comes in?
No. It was more of this was just our initial read. It says, does this merit? And that's the same thing. Same thing that a law enforcement investigator would do, is like, does this merit? But you have to have that spark. And again, cases go cold because every lead has dried up. If you're trying a traditional approach to solving a cold case, the hardest part of doing that is to just recreate the investigation that has already taken place. So you start with the crime, and then you look at all the different possibilities, and then you end up with the same dead ends as everybody else does. But in that process, you're looking for, again, what we call that one piece or the spark that says, this particular hypothesis or this name of this person, we got a key piece that says he's him. Now it's our job to disprove that. And so what you end up with is, instead of doing it in the traditional manner by going with the crime and then moving out from there, you start with the what you think is the answer and work your way backwards.
That was my question. So it's like, here's this person,
right?
And could he have been here at this time? And every single step or whatever on the way.
Against every piece of evidence, you have to find something that disproves it. And as we started doing that, I mean, the spark that we hit was the information that Gary Francis Poste's name was used as the key to breaking the ciphers in his letters.
How did that work?
The harder ones to break. I'd have to bring, we had two code breakers on there, Jen Buchholz being one of them, and we had a professional code breaker that we had take a look at it, and he came back to us, and we gave him the codes and we gave him the cipher, and his initial answer back to us was, with this I probably can break every one. It's going to take me a long time, but I could probably do it. That to us was the start that, okay, if this guy's name is the key, then nobody makes up a name like that and just says, I'm going to use somebody else's name and frame him and put him in there. He essentially signed every letter with his name embedded in some of the coding, and that includes the lettering on. You have to look at more than just the letter. You have to look at the outside of the envelopes, the drawings that he included, especially on the murder that supposedly took place up in Lake Tahoe with Donna. I think it was Donna Lass was the final victim up there, and her body was never recovered, but he left cryptic clues on how to recover that. And so we had to, our code breaker was looking at everything in those as he's trying to make sense of them. So that just, we let that go on a side, but that gave us the spark to say, let's start looking at some other pieces. And that's when we started looking at, where was he living, his geography, was he in the same area? Yes, those all lined up. Was he, did he have the same boot prints as the Air Force Wingwalker boots? That started to line up. We just weren't seeing anything that came out that disproved him, whereas in a lot of the other nominated suspects had been disproved. And so we continued along that lines, and until we got to the point where we said, we're as far as we can get without some of the hard pieces of hard evidence like DNA or a ballistics match from where we think he our initial tip-off said he was there when he buried his 9mm Luger and .22 pistol.
Okay, and back to the coded letters. There have been, I know, in the recent months, letters that were decoded that came out now, but I don't think that was your organization. I think it was somebody else. Were they correct in their decoding? That his name, or
there was Well, there was a piece within. They were correct within the coding, but I think from what our expert came back with is like the only issue he had with it was that there was, you don't leave extra letters, and you got to look at the outside of the envelope. Those were just the two pieces. And I didn't talk to our code breaker directly. Gosh, there's 40 folks in the team, so I let Tom do a lot of the coordination. But even when they cracked, I think it was called letter 340. It was still, nothing revealed that said, my name is Gary Francis Poste. I'm a millionaire. I own a mansion and a yacht. This is my address. None of that was in there. It was still just more taunting. You guys will never find me. Mwahaha. It was just, that kind of, those kind of pieces that were in there.
So was he sending like multiple messages at the same time?
It was a way to embed, you were able to embed them, and that's where a lot of our code breaker works, is being able to embed one message within another by using an alphanumeric combination of some of the lettering and some of the symbols that were in the letters.
That's insane.
I wish I could get more detail with that, but that's about as much as I've spent working on that aspect of it.
Well, that leads to this question. I saw it earlier, and I thought I'd bring it up, but do you know where Poste developed his cryptography skills? Was he just a talented amateur? Or
I think he was a talented amateur. When we broke, there were some codes that were embedded into the Cooper letters, and our code breaker was able to take those out because Robert Rackstraw had, he said, hey, these were easy to break because all I had to use was the manual that the military was using, the Army was using for cryptology. he was using the not the manual, he was using the instruction book that we all got trained on as junior intel folks. It was the code right out of there. He goes, so it wasn't hard to pull out some of the things from the Rackstraw letters. In fact, the final letter that he had sent, Rackstraw essentially sent his name. If I am caught, I am first 1 Lieutenant Rackstraw, I am CIA. That was his. That was the embedded cipher that he was able to pull out of the final letter.
Okay, that's amazing. So then, in that case, Zodiac essentially, by being an amateur, means that he's making up the rules. So you have nothing to compare it against. So you have to figure out how he created the game.
Right. It's having to break a code by cracking into somebody's mind is one of the most impossible tasks that you could ever do. And that's why these letters. I mean, the first ones were fairly easy. In fact, I think that the first one was broken by just a publication in the newspaper with the San Francisco Chronicle. A local mom was able to break it, but they got more and more in depth as he sent more and more. So the final one was the hardest to crack, which was what that other team was working on. I think it was 10 months ago they published that story.
Wow, amazing. Okay, well, and the evidence, coming forth, especially his name in the cryptology was, kind of a big alarm bell.
Right.
He had a scar that seemed to line up with some of the sketches.
He had received a scar his time in the Air Force, and very early on, and so as the sketches concluded the scar, we were able to show that that lined up. Again, that's getting a lot of grief from the sleuths on the internet this week. And part of the reason is look, you just can't base everything on one scar. You're right. You can't, it is just one piece. You could even call it hard evidence. You call it circumstantial evidence, but that's what we were able to show to some of the local law enforcement folks that we were working with behind the scenes. They said, God, that is a big piece. If you got the name and then you've got some, initial physical evidence plus a matching of the boot prints, you've got yourself a story. Now, where we are now with the DNA is we're still trying to obtain the DNA. We're still trying to work a way to be able to get up into the Sierra Nevada mountains to go recover where we think the pistols are.
Yeah. Okay. And that leads me to one of my next questions I had. From what I understand, the FBI and the police are pushing back now, or at least that's what the Sun Times is reporting.
Yeah.
Why? I'm curious about that.
I think when the police that are pushing back is the Riverside Police, and they, and we've been trying to have a more detailed conversation with them, but they firmly believe that Gary Poste is not the murderer of Sherry Jo Bates, who was killed in 1966 as a university student there. They believe, and they've answered us in a request to compare the DNA that they recovered off of that crime. They flat out answered us, say, we believe it was someone local. We do not believe it was Gary Poste because he didn't live in Riverside. So that it is what it is. I mean, that's working with law enforcement again. It's in their defense, these guys have to work real cold cases that are not 50 years old, that are much more important than, quite frankly, an old guy who died 3 years ago. But, this has gotten into mythic proportions. It's the holy grail of cold cases. I've heard that described that way. Mm-hmm. So, it's gotten to the point where we've had, and this is more than once, and it's more than one agency that has come to us and said, look, if we are going to step forward and really stick our necks out to do this DNA comparison, you pretty much have to solve the crime before we can help you.
I'm confused about that for a second.
It's a catch-22 where it's you pretty much have to totally convince us that it's that he is the killer, and look, we're at the point where the only way we can is with your cooperation, and it's like
I don't know. That's what I understand. No, I don't understand that. And this is why I was trying to think what would be a reason for refusing to test. It's like, well, you only have so much there, so it's you lose it. But I'm like, you could have a DNA record noted of all the markers,
right,
and have it on hand. And
well, that's all we're, again, that's all we're looking for. But again, it's when the story comes out in the media, the standard response for most law enforcement is that let's just bear through this, circle the wagons, and it'll be off folks' radars in a few weeks, and then we'll be able to stick to what we're working as our belief that he's a local guy. If I was working in law enforcement, guess what? I do the same thing. It's like I tell my folks the same thing.
To me, it would save time and prove you wrong. Okay, look, didn't match. Move on.
Right. Well, and that's the other thing is like if they're gonna, and I'm being very empathetic to what their situation is. Like, if we do it for these guys, every nut that comes out of the woodwork that says, my uncle was pissing me off the other day, I think he was Zodiac, and let me compare his DNA. There's oh, by the way, there's a huge chain of custody issue that has to be followed. Same thing with the going to get the pistols. And we were advised, we had an initial team that was going to go up to go get him in August. And we had to wait until we thought it was a better time to go hike up there. But, we had a team of a 55-year-old and a 270-year-old folks who were supposed to drag metal detector equipment 12 hours uphill into the mountains, that in a pathway that had been almost completely destroyed, so that you're breaking brush the whole time. And one of them, 3 hours into the hike, was finally injured, and they had to turn around and go back. And so it got to the point where this will be next to impossible for us to go there unless we can get some air support and fly in. We have an exact description from the witness that says he knows exactly where it was buried. It's not in a hard, an area to find. Once you know the location, you're only looking over an acre and a half. But the thing is, it's the same thing. It's like, if it's talking to some folks that I know in law enforcement who I have a lot of respect for and admiration. It was the same thing where, look, if somebody's going to put assets on this and have you guys fly up there, you can't just go up there on your own. There's a huge chain of custody issue that could discount the entire case. If you're just dragging this stuff out of the mountain and say, hey, yeah, here it is, trust us, this is where we found it. You got to have somebody with some authority that can put a chain of custody on it when you go up. By the way,
say a camera crew or somebody.
Or an actual actual law enforcement representative. And the thing is, and it goes back to the same questions. Look, nobody's going to give you one of our helicopters and do that unless you can pretty much prove that it's what it is. And so the final answer I got is, if you guys can get up there on your own and you can find it, then come see us, and then we'll fly back up there and pick it up. But you'd have to get up there, dig it up, basically verify that that's what it is, leave it there, and then we'll go back up there and get it.
I was gonna say, I mean, could you fund it? I'm not saying that you have money, but could you put together a fund to pay for, I'm
letting Tom run the business part, so and okay. He is doing a great job with that. So it's I'm letting him work that, but I'm going to be what was your answer before when I told you I didn't want to talk about the case? I'm being very ambiguous here. Yeah, being very circumspect and just saying I'm trusting Tom. He's got it handled. Oh, okay. I mean, I live on the East Coast. He's out in California, so it's he's going to be coordinating assets and talking to different folks out there.
Fair enough. Now, okay, going back, I mentioned the cops and the FBI pushing back, and you had mentioned other, I guess you'd say groups or hobbyists or what have you. I found, because I've had a couple other people, and I've had Tom O'Neill on. Tom O'Neill wrote Chaos, and that was him digging into the whole Manson family situation. He dug a lot of stuff with potential MK Ultra ties and different things like that. But he spent over 20 years. It was an article he was going to put into a paper, and 20 years of his life suddenly wiped out. He's got boxes behind him. Yeah. Major debt. I think he lost, almost everything. It just is there. Then there's Maury Terry, who came up with the Sons of Sam theory of a cult, essentially, is being involved with the Son of Sam killings. And it ultimately killed him. I mean, I would say, his life, the smoking, the lifestyle, being caught up in that. Now, that's why I did use the term obsession earlier. Right. Is there something with that, with these other groups that, kind of like Lord of the Rings Gollum, that it's like they're precious and nobody wants to let it go?
It could be. I mean, with every hobby, there's a, it can be, you can be obsessed with it. I mean, I am a big gamer. I do miniatures. I do board games. I'm a huge fan of Board Game Geek. I try to get to, all the gaming, some of the gaming conventions. I do it's video games. That's just my hobby. But that, I've seen folks that even in that hobby, it allows them to destroy their lives. I know somebody who divorced her husband, an Intel analyst that worked for me years and years ago, because he was a Civil War reenactor to the point where he was gone all the time doing something with Civil War reenacting. So it's no different than anything else. There's going to be groups that are naysayers that, that's why we didn't get in, or that's why we got disinvited to CooperCon, because who wants to invite the guys who say that there's no reason to have a CooperCon?
That wouldn't be a good diplomatic move.
We solved it. You guys can go home now. I mean, that's not how it works. And so there's, that's an industry. The hobby is an industry. So having these holy grail of cases out there, you're going to get some of that, but then you're also going to get, I think I did an interview. I was on Pete Turner's Break It Down show. And it was, the morning of, and I just had some traumatic personal things that had taken place the weekend before. And so I couldn't remember one of the names of the victims. And so, somebody came up and was like, oh my God, he couldn't remember the names of the victim. He doesn't know what he's talking about. It's just like, dude, I don't have my notes laid out. I do have a full-time job. There are some things that we are working at, at the same time, but this too we back off when it gets too much. And, we pursue this as much as we can with clearly understanding that this could be all consuming, and it has been all consuming to some folks. Yes, Dwayne, 40K. I'm into it. I saw one of the comments.
I don't know what that is.
It's a game. It's a sci-fi miniature game.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I'm into it. I am a 40K nerd.
Okay, well, there you go. You just outed yourself. Yeah. I have no idea. I don't care. Obviously, I'm not into that. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Where was I going with it? Yeah, I guess I get concerned when I hear it, because I am feeling like, what are we in it for? Are we in it to solve a case and, help families move on from horrible events that happen to their family? Mm-hmm. Or are we in it because of a certain personal glory in whatever the case is? I worry.
Yeah, I'm very cognizant of the egotistical part of that, and I don't think I've run into any of us that are into that more than our motivation is more of we these are why'd you climb that mountain? Well, because it's there. I mean, why'd you want to solve that case? He says, because nobody has done it. Mm-hmm. That kind of thing. I tell you that there's family members family members of that have realized that we're associated with the Zodiac Killer. They're having problems. I mean, they're it's 50 years later, and they're realizing a father, or even local parentis, or a parental figure could have been the killer. It's been devastating to them. I mean, now let's look at the same thing with and we have listed the last was it the last victim of the Atlanta child killing. We received a tip off on that one as well, and we're working that. And that has got to be ugly. That's got to be one of the most saddest episodes. And I know they covered it on the Mine Hunters season 2. I watched that. That had to be one of the saddest episodes that that's one of the reasons why really we became interested in that one, because you realize that the killer that was put behind bars for the Atlanta child murders, there were 26 murders. He was only put behind bars for 2 of them. There are 24 families that are still suffering 40 years later from these murders, and I think it's at least 1 or 2 of the bodies were never recovered, and that's why we think there are still victims 40 years later of these crimes. It's these families who are suffering, and so that's another motivation for us to solve that. Same thing with either the Zodiac Killer or you see the last Hoffa dig. We've got a tip off on that one, which we are extremely skeptical, but we are taking a very methodical approach to taking a look at that to find harder evidence. But it's the same thing. It's there are still family members that suffered when their dad disappeared in was 1975. I mean, that was a very traumatic. I grew up outside of Detroit. That was all the news, every news. My dad was a middle school assistant principal at the time, and the police came one day and made all the teachers pop the trunks of the cars because they received a tip off that Hoffa was kept in one of the trunks of the cars. I mean, that's how far reaching it got. And so you grew up with that. And so that's these cases, they do drive at you in the back of your mind. And so when an opportunity comes up to tackle one, then if we've got that spark, we'll take a look at it. And again, you have to have that start point. Otherwise, recreating what everybody else has already done is just it makes it your chances of being able to solve a cold case, different cold cases, become extremely hard. Now, Jen Buchholz has done a great job with the case that she solved in Arkansas, and one of the reasons she did it was through crowdsourcing, by starting a Facebook group of folks that were in the know and knew the crime and were locals that were involved. And what it turned out for her is that the one person that she had fingered for the crime joined the group because he wanted to figure out what was going on. And so I mean, that's a whole different. So we combined the old-fashioned gumshoe. We provided. I came in as an intelligence, former military intelligence officer. I have an expertise in intelligence analysis. I have a book from 2020 called Intelligence Operations that I wrote. So I took it in from that perspective to use some of the analytical techniques that we use, and then for the Cooper case in particular, we use some data mining tools. We use some link analysis tool to make sense of the mess of information that the initial investigation had brought in, and now for Jen Buchholz's case, we brought in somebody who's got expertise in crowdsourcing, almost like what's the Netflix series? I won't say the whole name, but don't F with cats.
Oh yeah, they're amazing.
That was a crowdsourcing operation pure to find
get 4chan on it. I mean, remember 4chan or I mean, there's some. Yeah. Do you remember who was it? Shia LaBeouf, I think it was, or one of those where
I don't know.
It kind of an off the wall kooky actor, and he was like put this flag in the ground and had a camera pointed on it. And it's like within a day they had the flag, like
where it was.
Then they had to track down, pick it up, and because it was, I mean, you have people that are so hardcore and smart that they'll be like, doing noise analysis about the time of the day, and is there a plane that flew overhead at what time? What's the flight route and the sun shadow aspects? And I mean, it's just amazing. Now,
the only thing from a crowdsourcing perspective, though, is over 90+% of it is noise. You have to, so you're doing analysis of crowdsourcing is you have to be able to, you're getting so much information. And I know this thing like, how do you do data mining? You don't do data mining by you can't find a needle in a haystack by pouring on more hay. Mm-hmm. So that's really the tough part. So when you do crowdsourcing, it becomes a mess of cats that you have to herd and figure out. It makes sense of everything that everybody is talking about back and forth. I mean, gosh, go to the comment section of any YouTube video talking about the Zodiac Killer, and boy, we are out to space with some of that stuff, with some of the comments. But that's what though, you need to have that. You need to. That's part of the discourse that has to happen. I'm completely against censorship, so it's that's the kind of thing. If somebody's going to come and beat us up, yes, please do provide us the evidence for that. I had somebody from the United Kingdom said, "Hey, what about this person and that?" I said, "Great, send me the evidence. We'll take a look at it." And I never got a real good piece of evidence back from them. So it's like, yeah, well, then where'd you get your hard evidence that this guy was also involved? And
I have that with OJ. No, I'm not kidding. I've had his manager on a couple times. He thinks somebody else, and I mean, a lot of traction. But I mean, I get comments to this day, and I'm like, I don't know enough. I just bring a guest on. I'm learning a little bit, but I'm not deep into it. But I wanted to go back. I was going to interject earlier, but I am curious because there's a toll, and we were talking about that on investigating this kind of stuff.
Right.
To me, I'm not trying to underplay it, but it may come off that way. Chasing DB Cooper is almost charming in the sense of he wasn't a serial killer. he didn't, there's kind of urban legend quality to it.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel as dark as, Zodiac murdered people. It was really dark, and to get through comparing the two, did it feel different to you guys?
There's been other serial killers who, quite frankly, have killed more people but are not as well known. And the reason why Zodiac is at such a mythic standard is the terrorism that he also included with, as part of his, whether it was his fulfillment cycle or whatever. So he, that's what caught the, if you can terrorize a population, you don't, one of the key tenets of terrorism is you don't need everybody killed. You just need a couple, but you need to make sure everybody's watching. Sure. And, to get your message out, and the message is being a taunt and that kind of thing. Son of Sam was the same thing. You had women changing their hairstyles or hiding their hair because they did not want to be caught out, in the city. And, again, how many people did he kill? It was, horrific as the crimes were. I think the fear and the terror that was ginned up by these folks made them the national story.
Whereas the Gary Ridgway, Green River Killer,
right,
killed far more people,
right,
but they were saying, well, they were living a sketchy lifestyle, so people probably felt, that segment of the community.
You're disconnected from that emotionally. It's like, God, that's horrible. I mean, but God, I mean, even the bow and arrow killer. I can't remember what country that's in, UK or Australia. That was this week.
I know.
It's just guy went on a rampage, killed a bunch of people using a bow and arrow. And they're classified as a terrorist event, but next year at this time, or 2 years from this time, except for the folks that were directly involved, everybody is going to forget about it. That's why with Zodiac, you've got a mythical symbol that he was able to brand. This guy branded himself, from a marketing standpoint, was awesome with the letters. He got everyone involved trying to break the codes, because if you're doing that, then now you're paying attention to me, and I'm feeding off that energy.
Apparently, Norway.
That's Norway. Okay, thank you. Yeah, exactly. And that's just
Norway had another guy who was a spree killer that killed like 70 people.
Right, exactly. Yeah, at the summer camp on the island, he had almost a captive population. Even the folks that were in the water that he forced into, they stood there waiting in the water while he was reloading. I mean, it was almost a shock piece. But then again, it's nowhere. He didn't have an entire city on edge, but because he had been caught relatively quickly afterwards. He had never gotten away, and was now living in our hearts and minds late at night and festering in our horrors, like the Zodiac Killer had done. Same thing with Cooper. He disappeared and nobody ever caught him. That's the whole mystique behind him.
Right. People almost were cheering on him. I know it sounds, but they sort of were, because he got over on the man. It's like
the sticking to the man. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's again, there's part of Cooper Con is like, we don't want this guy to be solved, because we actually are admirers of him. He didn't kill anybody. He didn't. The only thing he did was, I know hijacking an airlines is a pretty serious thing, but of course, he only stole between $200,000 and $250,000 of money, and and a lot of folks think, well, he probably died in the jump anyways. It's that kind of thing where it's as we were looking at him, it was just you see with him as one long string. The hijacking was just one grifting event after another that this guy's entire life was based upon. And it was not really for, the same. It wasn't the same kind of thing as somebody would get off of on killing someone or a serial killer. It was more of a, narcissistic, sociopath edge of just, look, I am for myself and nobody matters. This is how things are going to go. I'm going to take care of number one, and that's how I'm going to lead my life. Who cares about the rules of society? That was really, that's the stick it to the man piece of it.
I've got an off one for you that just popped in my head while we were talking. I don't know why, but Escape from Alcatraz, because there's been some people recent years, I don't know, that have kind of said, no, that was me. I think they've died since, but that's kind of one of those that reminded me a little of DB Cooper, right? It's like three people escaped, nobody ever saw them again. They probably died in the action, but did they?
Well, the problem with the good story is you need to have the story end. And these stories have never ended. Same thing with the Kennedy assassination. It's it's the same.
Both of them, by the way.
Same thing. I just opened a whole nother can of worms on your show. I don't know anything about that. Just so everybody knows, I'm going to get calls from my mom and that kind of thing. But there's if there's no ending to the story, that's left up to the populace that says, you know what, I'm going to work to end this. I'm going to work to end this. I'm going to work to try to solve this so we can have the ending to the story. Or it just becomes such a thing. It's like, God, I don't think, great comment, Jack the Ripper, great piece of, and they think they probably, there was somebody came forward and we think that this guy was a Russian immigrant who was suffering from, I think, venereal disease, and slowly,
butcher, his mind was melting, or a member of the royal family, or a very famous artist at the time, or
lots of theories on that ones, and their answer to it is that he died from venereal disease, and that's why the killing stopped all of a sudden. We got to have the answer to that story and to some of the greatest stories that are out there. And these are the stories that capture our imagination.
Well, awesome. Now let's wrap up and just learn about the case breakers. And I kind of want to know who you are, how you got founded, and the third one, how you determine what's going to be something that you actually pursue or not.
Yeah, there's since we broke the story again, the case breakers is really the child of Tom and Donna Colbert, the two folks out in California. Tom's been working on this forever. I mean, he brought me online. I was involved in an operation in the military called Able Danger, where I was hunting Al Qaeda prior to 9/11 for Special Operations Command using data mining and intelligence analysis. I got dragged before the Senate Judiciary Committee, House Armed Service Committee in 2005, 2006, and I met Tom through a common channel of asking me some, he wanted to be able to learn how to do. How to use data mining for investigative purposes. So I started doing some pro bono, just advice for him. And so it was 2011 where he brought me in and said, look, I think I got a case. I think this is fantastic. And let's work on the Cooper case. And so, yeah, sure. I mean, it was this, part-time thing that I did in the evenings and as much as possible, we set our own pace. But where Tom is now, since we've broken the story, we've received dozens and dozens of folks who want to lend their skills to our to this organization. And what the saddest part is, and we actually keep separate folders that we're sharing with each other. We received lots of cases of people just pleading for help. Will you please look at my mother's murder, or will you please look at, and they're just, some of them are cryptic, some of them are just, quite frankly, they're depressing to know that there are somewhere up in lines of 6,000 cold cases every year. And I think there's somewhere up in lines of like 18,000 active ones right now. I mean, that's just an entire segment of the population that suffers every day without any closure, again, to what happened.
Sorry to interrupt. Eva, a regular, wants to know if your data mining techniques are published. Is that in your book?
The book that I have on intelligence operations, you can go to Amazon or my publisher, cognella.com. The intelligence operations is really how to set up an intelligence operation. So it's from the considerations you got to do for the people, the data, and the tools. And so it's the techniques that I have in there specifically are more intelligence techniques, but they use things like threat profiling, threat profiling of an entire group, not profiling of a serial murder, threat mapping. I have some pieces in there, but it's really part of an overall, once over. But some of those techniques are. We use, again, structured analytical techniques. One that's used in a lot of cold cases is called analysis of competing hypotheses. And it's I would refer them to Randy Fearson and the Fearson Associates or Globalitica. They're friends of mine that run an analytical company here outside of the Northern Virginia. That they publish that as a technique. That is one of them. That's fantastic. But then, there's tons of them out there. There's, as you get into the analytical world, you find throughout your career, you start adding more and more tools and methodologies to your toolkit. And as you get more experience, you can pull them out and adapt them for different problem sets.
Okay. And now I guess the last part is, what makes you determine what it's going to be? Is you mentioned spark?
Yeah, each of these were again, we have to see. And I hate to say it, I'm giving the same answer that law enforcement gives us. Is law enforcement like, hey, you got to solve the case before we'll really get involved. And to us, it's like, look, you got to give us a very hard piece, a start point. If you're just telling us, hey, can you recreate the investigation that everybody else has done and not figured out? We don't have that. We don't have the force on our side where we can just figure out a new approach to it psychically or whatever. It's like we have to see a no kidding hard piece of evidence that changes that picture, or it's or it just becomes extremely difficult. Now there's ways to doing that, but the amount of resources that you have to pile in, again, crowdsourcing is a very effective way of doing that because it's a lot of volunteers that don't need charge of anything, but you still have to have time with somebody doing the investigation, and that's time that they're not getting paid doing something else.
All right, well, perfect. And on that note, Erik, thank you. I'd like to bring you back on the next thing that's coming down the line.
Sure. I mean, this one's there's still things that are unfolding. We're talking. We're still working at nights and weekends and things like that. So there's still things that may come up. If it comes up, it'll probably come up in the news before anything else. But I'm sure to let you know. Please do.
Now, folks, I have a link to a lot of what Erik's done. He's got a little collection of articles and different things that he's put together. Yeah. That's in the description under him if you want to learn more about him.
Okay.
And also the casebreakers.org, I believe it.
Yep.
It's a site.
Yep.
And on that, thank you so much, Erik.
Great. Thank you.